Hello, mentors. Welcome to our podcast series, Mentorships in Education, brought to you by Just Education at justeducationfirst.com. I am your host, Judith Epstein. I am very excited about the wide range of experts who have volunteered to give up their time and expertise. They will share their innovative ideas, their exciting perspectives, their rich resources, and their research with us. Please continue to delve into these topics on their websites and with your legal counsel, healthcare provider, and education professional. Our guests will have information that will be relevant to mentors supporting struggling students, parents, teachers, administrators, legal support, and health professionals. We will address all levels of education with issues that affect academic performance. Our goal is to open discussions and introduce a variety of approaches to those searching for information in a free venue. So mentors, let me introduce our guest for today. Hello everybody. I want to welcome all of our mentors who are listening today and our guest, Jason Gruhl. Thank you, Jason, so much for taking so much time out of your busy schedule to help prepare for this.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. Jason caught my eye when I was doing some research for guests because he has a wonderful attitude about kids and kids who struggle. And his attitude is, and this is kind of my quote, but this is how I feel about Jason. If something needs to change, I'll change it. And that's kind of Jason. He doesn't sit and complain about it. He doesn't sit and try and get other people to do something. He grabs the bull by the horn and he gets out there and finds a way to do something about the problem. And he did that with kids who were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So we're going to hear about that some more. But before we get into a conversation with Jason, I want to tell you a little bit about him. Jason believes that all kids are smart, brave, kind, and creative. And he writes books to help them remember that. We're going to talk about those books later in the podcast. Kids are whole and complete all of the time. As an author and a psychotherapist for children and adults, Jason is dedicated to making a difference in people's lives and to helping them realize their power and their potential. He's a former special ed educator and a former executive and founder of the Joshua School, which is what kind of caught my attention to begin with. And we're going to hear more about this because it's a school that's focused on kids with who have been diagnosed and who are on the autism spectrum. And he's doing some wonderful jobs with them. He's started out, I believe, in Denver and then moved to Boulder as time went on. He holds a master's degree in counseling psychology. He's a public speaker and organizational consultant as well as a mediation teacher. He got a special ed degree at the University of Colorado, Denver, and a master's at Regis U. And when not writing, Jason has some addictions. He's addicted to scones, board games, reading, and watching sci-fi movies. I'm not sure you want to tell your kids about that. So thank you, Jason. And he has a wonderful sense of humor, and I'm sure that's going to come through during our talk. Thank you. It's so nice to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the ways that I kind of felt connected with you is that you shared with me a very personal experience you had when you first started to teach. And it came into play it was your aha moment in some of the things that you did following that. So why don't we start a little bit with your experience with teaching, kind of go through this epiphany of yours and where that took you.
Sure. So I had been working with adolescents and well, I'd been working with adults with some major mental illnesses up in Minneapolis, and had sort of run out of skills after college. And so I moved to Denver to get a master's in counseling psychology, and so that I could essentially move back to Minneapolis and keep doing what I was doing. And when I moved to Denver, I started working with adolescents that were struggling with some mental illnesses and some behavioral challenges as well. And so I started getting excited sort of around like younger people. And at some point, I actually wanted to make a shift from where I was working. I started working in Denver public schools. And at the time, there was a huge glut in special education teachers. And so I applied for a paraprofessional job, and they hired me as the special ed teacher. And sometimes, this is kind of one of my philosophies, is it's, we laughed, I think last time we talked around like, it's amazing what you can do when you don't know what you can't do. And so sort of showing up as like I'm the teacher of this class now. How do I even do that? And I had to go back to school and get a degree. So rest assured, I got the credentials later, but this sort of not knowing was a really powerful way to enter education, because I got to sort of look at how I thought humans should be educated just from the get-go. And this was for a class of kids with autism and some various other developmental disabilities. And so we started just sort of saying, how are these kids viewing the world? It isn't, to me and to us, it didn't strike us like something was wrong. It struck us that the educational system didn't know how to accommodate this particular human's way of being in the world. And so we got to look at that really freshly, and in our naivete, got to experiment with tons of different things. And so we were making some real strides with the kids. We used elements of applied behavior analysis, being able to kind of break down skills into tiny little pieces and really focus on, how to help kids using things that reinforce them, that actually reinforce them and actually did this. And also like human nature and human sense, like how do you make friends? What's social? Like, how do you teach humor? How do you have people feel confident and respected and comfortable in their own skin? So all these different things we sort of were looking at. And in the midst of that, I'd been teaching for a number of years. A little student named Joshua came into our lives, and he was this amazing little student. And one night at home, he was having dinner, and he passed out into his dinner, and they could not revive him. And it's sort of inconclusive of what happened, but we came in the next day and had found out that Joshua had died. And it's the kind of moment in your life where there is no sort of way to make sense of it. And except to sort of say, what kind of world did we create for him? What kind of a setting how good were we to this boy? How much did we help him enjoy the 9 years that he had on this planet? So you said, and when you introduced me, that I'm not a complainer. We complained as teachers quite a bit about this, about the school system we were in and about the limitations and the lack of money and all these things. But to your point, we then said, you know what, if a kid has 9 years on the planet, this world has to have better alternatives than what our public schools are providing at the time. And I think they've improved some, but the whole system is still, that's another podcast. But
are you committing yourself?
I have plenty to say on that. But so we decided to sort of like take all of the things that we'd been complaining about and to create a school. And we called it the Joshua School. For the next 2 years, my staff and I met on the weekends and after school in one of my colleagues' garages. And we planned out curriculum and planned out fundraising and planned out, how we would get the word out about this school. And over the next 2 years, we did that. And then in 2003, but actually, I think 2005, we left our jobs en masse, and we created this school and cashed in our retirements and prayed that it would work. So that was sort of the beginning of the next phase of my life with the Joshua School.
So talk a little bit to the philosophy of the Joshua School and how the expectations of the Joshua School were different than the expectations in the public school. I remember you're saying to me that in the public school, the bar is kind of low, that, if people are doing something, that it's better than nothing. And how did you redirect your efforts in the Joshua School?
Yeah, at the time, it did really feel like that in the public schools, where it was, as long as there were these kids that didn't fit in, and these kids that sort of couldn't follow the curriculum of the public schools, and so as long as they were safe and not getting into trouble, that was somehow success. And that was a real problem for us. And it's a pretty simple idea that ends up being radical. One that says everyone that shows up is exactly perfect as they are. And so that kid is showing up in this world in a particular way. And what makes that look right or wrong isn't the child. It's our expectations, our societal sort of norms, the things that we sort of make us uncomfortable, et cetera. And so we just said, whenever a kid shows up in our school, we're going to say, there's nothing wrong here. And there's actually a ton that's beautiful. And so how does this kid view this world? And what does quality of life look like for a human being? Because now if we're outside of this system, we can sort of teach anything we want. And if we want to teach sort of what does quality of life feel like and look like, let's look at social skills. Let's look at how you navigate the community. Let's look at building self-confidence and making sure that that's something that feels, integrated into them. Let's not worry so much about the curriculum that will lead to some tests that supposedly lead to a quality life. Let's look at what actually feels like quality life right now in this moment for this kid, and then just take the next step. So anyways, go on.
I like what you just said, and I want to kind of emphasize it. Not public, is it where you say that public school looks more to the skills that build a quality life down the road, as opposed to your perception, which is what are the skills needed now to build a quality life now?
Yeah, I think that, there's I forget who says it, but like how we, I think it's Annie or someone, how we live our days is how we live our lives. And so I think you have to keep a foot in both ponds. You have to keep your eye on the prize, the long term, like being able to sort of see what the child can't see in this moment. That's why we're the adults guiding this. And we sort of say, down the road, I anticipate these things being important. But that gets built by really looking at how do you excite a child and a human about the life that they're living right now? Like, how do you sort of take what they're doing and so we would sort of see what reinforced the child organically, and then use those very things. I remember one of my students was obsessed with the Titanic, and his parents were like, please, our only goal is to make him not be obsessed with the Titanic. And I said, well, I'm going to take a really different approach, and I don't know if you're going to like me for it, but I'm actually going to use the Titanic for every single thing that we do. And so we taught communication through Titanic. We taught social skills and history. We taught friendship. If he had a really great day with, like being kind to all of his friends, we would build a Titanic model at the end of it. And after that year, he was so saturated with the Titanic, he really did get over it. But we used it to really, go with his own interest. And it isn't rocket science by any stretch, obviously. But it is sort of something that in a small tailored environment, And I would argue even in larger public schools, we can be paying attention far more to what each child is motivated by and use those things to really have them love the world and fall in love with learning and curiosity in a way that doesn't feel laborious and irrelevant sort of for some of the things that we teach.
I love that. And I'm going to add to it because I was working with a student the end of last year where the teachers had become this was a middle school student, and they didn't know what to do. This is when the kids were still going into school. All he wanted to do was build spaceships with Legos. Mm-hmm. And so all he wanted to talk about when he got into school was showing the pictures of what he built and talking about all the different parts of it. And they were just beside themselves. They didn't know what to do. And so when I started to work with him, and I said to the teachers, I don't really see the problem. Let me have just a little bit of time with them. And so his parents allowed me to do what I wanted to do, which was very similar to what you did. Yeah. And I said to him, do you know that building Lego spaceships is connected to math and is connected to English and is connected to history?
Yeah.
He looked at me like I was totally out of my mind.
Right. And
what we did is we took I started with history because his ships were based on some of the space programs. He loved Star Trek and Star Wars, and all of those ships had names. And so we did research on them. And so I said to the teacher, he's got to write a paragraph where this is what we're writing it on. I know what you want them to write it on, but is it more important the topic or that he's going to write the paragraph? He didn't just write paragraphs. He wrote pages on this stuff. Yeah. He did so much research, and he took pictures of things, and he really got into it in the math part too. I won't go into it, but what you're saying is so important to not diminish the student's interest, but to find a way to incorporate it in what you are doing and be open. I'm going to give one more example. One of my students didn't feel, this was a college student actually, he was just fed up with all these, he thought when he got to college he wouldn't have to take any math anymore and he wouldn't have to take any science anymore. He wanted to do art, and he was drawing art, and his English teacher wanted them to do a research paper. So I said, let me talk to your English teacher. I'll get back to you. Is it okay? He said yes. He gave me her name. I called and I gave her an idea. And he came back to me the next week and he said he was so excited. The teacher gave him permission to do a graphic novel of the topic.
Wow.
And so he researched the topic, but he had to design each page as to how he was going to depict that information. So I love, your philosophy, what you're saying, and that's why it's so important for us as educators to talk more so that we can get some of these successes out as well as the failures so that people aren't going to repeat them.
Yeah. And I also, I think there are a lot of teachers get a bad rap in the public schools, and I think that there are a lot of amazing teachers in that system. There are also a lot of real bad teachers in that system. But there is, I think, the key there too is also that it is systemic. I think that in 2020, this is sort of the thing that's getting blown wide open, that we're just seeing like everything is not these isolated cases, whether it's through Black Lives Matter and policing or the education system or whatever. Like all of this is part of a system. And that system is putting pressures on teachers and is putting pressures with more and more kids in classrooms and all these different things that none of it makes sense. And I'm praying that in some way the systems can have like a wash of common sense that comes back over it, because it is, I think a lot of teachers would love to do some of these things and yet put it in the pressures that they have and the tests and obligations that we have that have no relevance in giving someone, a human being, a quality of life that is worth and tailored to their own way of being in this world. That it's just maddening. It's maddening.
So I guess I want to say to you that some of the barriers to learning at school, whether they be the kinds of things we just talked about or behavior issues, or I call them systemic barriers. And I feel sometimes that our system, it's not so much the teachers necessarily, but it's the system that putting pressure on the teachers to, get out of the classroom the kids that are a problem, get everyone to do the same thing so they can, be evaluated across the board on some kind of a scale.
Yeah.
And it's too bad. And can you talk a little bit to what you think some of the social and emotional issues are that you saw happening in public school that you've addressed in the Joshua School by teaching explicitly some of these things, which a lot of kids may be coming into public school not knowing these skills. They're expected to understand them or do them, and they're being criticized, ostracized, punished because they don't know them. I know you spoke to that before, so maybe you can talk to that a little bit on communication issues.
Yeah, I think it has to do with this idea of being able to look at, we have such a rigid idea of what education is. And then also sort of over the past, 30 years or so, there's been such a, we've painted the world as such a dangerous place, I think, for kids. We're very sort of scared of the human sciences and helping humans become humans. And honestly, the trick is that has to be taught, or there's just sort of more fear and more misunderstanding of who we are as a species. So I think we, again, put everything back on the table. When you talk with parents and when you actually sort of spend time with the child, really what's important to them is like, I want my kid to be happy. I want my kid to be able to communicate and express themselves and express what they need so that they can navigate this world with ease and self-confidence. I want them to laugh and maybe have some friends. I want them to be able to, these are the things that give our lives joy and give our lives fulfillment. There are skills and traits, absolutely, that sort of, I love writing. I have kind of a math brain. And so some of that stuff sort of excites me too, but not in the way that these human pieces do. And so while it's important to really focus on, again, seeing what's important to that child and introducing them to lots of things so that maybe there's a hidden gem that they don't know that they love. But really in being able to focus in the same way that we teach a concept in math, being able to break down human behaviors and see sort of like, here's how you interact with a friend. There are lots of things at play. Your facial expression, the tone of your voice, like the words that you choose to use, how intimate the conversation gets too fast. So pacing in how we talk about things. Being able to sort of like see all of the things that humans in general do, all of it being made up and sort of crazy, that things that we do and accept, we have to teach those to kids. In the developmental disability world, it's often called like the hidden curriculum, the stuff that we all take for granted, as you say, but that is hidden and that we have to uncover for people who often don't understand it. And actually that isn't just for, in this day and age, it's any kid. All of this stuff is so made up. Why you and I, we might come at each other at the street and we start flapping our hands. And then that means that I'm happy to see you and that's a greeting. Well, that's completely bizarre. Who would get that if they hadn't seen that before? Or that we would, hello, and say these words that mean absolutely nothing, because in another country they mean absolutely nothing to them. And you and I wake up every day and agree to do the same things over and over again. And if that doesn't make sense to you, if you're not taught some of those things explicitly, it just seems bizarre and frustrating. So I coming from, working a lot with kids that sort of have a different view than what typical kids, neurologically are, how they're experiencing the world. I think about those things a lot, but the more I thought about them, the more I saw it in myself, the more I saw it in my own neurotypical friends, the more I saw it in neurotypical children, that where you're like, you know what, this is just good education. Like we all need to sort of be paying attention to, we talk about whole child, but we don't really, that doesn't mean throwing in an art lesson every 2 weeks and, playing music in the background. That's not holistic education. So.
When we were talking before, you said to me that the public schools were not all that thrilled with your opening up your own school to welcome some of the kids who were having these who had diagnosed with these developmental disabilities. I think you had a great response, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that and the turnaround with the public schools.
Yeah. And I'll start by saying, like, I think in the Denver area, public schools have made some large strides. I think a lot of, because of the Joshua School, in terms of sort of working with kids differently. But that has not always been so. The public schools have to be, again, small side tangent, the public schools have to, in this country, reform and be different, because they are our best hope at making sure that all kids are able to sort of fulfill, step into their own lives fully and beautifully and explore that. So we do have to figure that out. So I am a big fan of public schools, and yet I also realized that what we wanted to do couldn't take place within the container that was the problem. Like, you had to step outside the problem to come up with something different so that you could actually be of assistance to what the problem was. And so I think that it did that. But when word got out that we were going to leave and start this school, and I went to a conference down in Colorado Springs, and there was one school district representative that was like, can I take you out for lunch? And I was like, oh, how nice. This is so sweet. And I just want to talk to you about your school. And so I met them for lunch in this room in the hotel. And there were, I think, 12 heads of special ed around that table from every school district in the metro area and some beyond. And essentially they were all there to tell me, you will not get a single child from any of our school districts. What you're doing is exclusionary. We believe in inclusion. We believe in educating kids in their own school districts, and this is a bad idea. Anything you can think of was sort of said that day to discourage this from happening. And I sort of, like, as I walked in the room, saw what was happening and sort of tried to do a couple, meditation techniques and
kind of like an ambush.
Oh, it was not even kind of. It was a total ambush. And so I sat there and I just said, there's a child in every one of your school districts that baffles you, and that you don't know what to do, and in your conscience and in your heart that child is not getting the education that they deserve. And it isn't because you don't care and it's whatever, but you don't know what to do. And I need you to be open to the idea of giving me that student and just saying, let's see if we can do something different by looking at this differently. And they each sort of said, that will never happen. And they walked out of the room, and I sat there in the chair, sort of resolute, and like, okay, you've just made me want to start this school times 500, but slightly defeated too. I mean, I came from the public schools. I love the public schools. I saw what couldn't get done there, or what wasn't getting done, and decided to do something different. And for that, I was being sort of warned and threatened and these kinds of things.
Ostracized.
Yeah. But the sort of the silver lining over that was that we maintained really great relationships with public schools over that. I believe in speaking the truth, but I don't believe in raking people over the coals. And so the public schools aren't doing what they need to be doing completely. That's the truth to me. And they each, over the next 10 years, did take a chance on this school. And to this date, every county and every school district sort of within the Denver metro area utilizes the Joshua School, either in the Denver campus or the Boulder campus or something, for some of their students. And I think one of the things that we were I'm a good businessman and a terrible businessman. The school is very successful. It's solvent. It's a great business, and I didn't know I was good at that, but I am. But I'm bad because we give away all of our ideas. We give away, because education, if you're doing something really well, I don't think you'd have to worry about going out of business. And frankly, if you go out of business with the public schools because they're doing it so well, I will happily go out of business for that reason. Right. So we shared, anytime a student would come, the school district could come to our school and observe and see, well, what are you doing? How is this working? Like, what materials are you using? And we would, not only would we, let them see all of that, but we would give them materials. We would show them the different things. We would provide trainings with them. We would do all these. We created a training division at the school that was specifically for going back into the public schools and building facility and building sort of like, the ability to do this on a bigger scale. Like, if you have X number of kids, here's how we would tailor what we do at the school, et cetera. So it has to be something around, there has to be sort of an altruistic level of sharing that's going on in addition to, what you're doing in private settings, because it would be difficult to do some of the things that we did in a public setting, but that's why we did it. This isn't for necessarily every child, and yet there were things we learned that are absolutely impactful for every child. So that was sort of the,
One of the things I tell my parents and my students is, my job working with kids is the only job I've ever heard of, really, where you do it well, you don't get a promotion, you don't get an increase, you get fired.
Right. Right.
So it kind of speaks to what you just said.
Yeah.
You added a preschool to your Joshua School?
Yeah, and so now there's a Denver campus, there's a Boulder campus, there's an amazing preschool down in Centennial, and that preschool, sort of speaking of inclusion, it's actually half children with developmental disabilities, and then or maybe even be like 2/3 of the children sort of neurotypical children. So it's a typical preschool and a special preschool. Right. And so that everyone gets to work back and forth with each other, but in ways that you can really monitor sort of like how overwhelming is this for someone, or how, can we push this a little further here or push it there? It's not just like plop, here's what you're stuck with.
Jason, if, a typical child wanted, their parents wanted them to go to the Joshua School, would they be able to do that?
Yeah, well,
I mean, that happened?
It has happened, because a lot of staff who have typical kids that are, they would often go to the preschool there and then move up, with the kids. Right. And then at some point go out, just because maybe it's highly tailored. It could happen. It's just that the school is built mainly for kids that absolutely are not getting what they need sort of in the public schools because of the rigidity of that. So it might not be the best use of the resources there, but in terms of like teaching strategies and things like that, it's meant to be able to accommodate a kid wherever they are, at whatever developmental level, at whatever, et cetera.
So I know you also do counseling, parents and students, and you mentioned ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. Is that your go-to approach in your counseling as well? What kind of issues do you deal with or address in private with your kids? And I guess thirdly, I'm curious because I do CBT, I do ACT. I'm curious for my own personal reasons why you chose ABA as opposed to maybe some of the other approaches?
So in my counseling practice, I do, if I had to label it, I would say the closest thing is cognitive behavioral therapy, so CBT.
Oh, okay.
In terms of like counseling with adults and with kids and adolescents, there are some of my clients that I see have a developmental disability of some kind, or I actually have gotten a couple kids with fairly rare disorder, although it's getting more known, called pandas. And so I work with a couple kids that have pandas and or young adults, and so some of my past training and work sort of at the Joshua School comes into play there, but it's still sort of a lot of CBT and a lot of I would call my own brand of kind of Buddhist humanistic CBT sort of. So it looks at the whole person, like we do in counseling, and then sort of figures out where do you want to go and what are the barriers to you getting there.
A little bit of a mismatch kind of trying here and there.
Yeah, I think so. So I'm not a counselor that's sort of like, Jungian, and there's like a platform I have to follow, and this is how this goes type of thing. Or so, but yeah, and I see kids from age 8 to up to adults in their 60s and 70s. So whole range of counseling there.
What are the, I guess I'm more interested in what things you're working with students on, how, I know you do meditation, for example,
right,
with them. So let's just take meditation for a minute. When do you teach kids meditation? How young a child, can you teach meditation? I'm thinking medicate.
Right.
Meditation to a preschooler, first, second grader. Is it only applicable with older students? And if you do it with younger kids, how do you approach that? What?
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. I think you can teach meditation as if they can sit up, or even if they can lie down. if they have some verbal, if they have some understanding kind of what's being said, you can teach meditation pretty young. And there are lots of books. In fact, the main publisher that I work with, Bala Kids, which is with Shambhala Publications, does a number of books on meditation for kids. And there's a deck that's out called the Monkey Mind deck, which looks at helping kids begin to be curious about their mind. So meditation, in terms of, at the school, being able to teach meditation does two things. It's both physical and cognitive. And I would argue it's also sort of spiritual, helping us understand that we're part of something bigger, that we're connected to all things. But in terms of physically, it helps us really get in our bodies. Oftentimes, I would often say that autism spectrum disorders and different developmental disabilities are such a physical manifestation because kids seem to have a difficult time actually embodying their bodies. And so one of the things that we would really focus on is being able to have kids feel physically grounded in their body. And meditation is one of the ways that you can really do that. So in that respect, we do things where a kid lies on the ground and we'll have them tense up. Some of it's kind of yoga-esque. They tense up their, hand and then their arm and then their legs and their body, and then breathe in between and then release. And then keep repeating that so that when they finish it, you can feel the border of your body. You can feel where you start and end. And I think that's something all of us begin to lose it rather quickly. I think mostly because our mind starts to focus outwardly on, am I okay? Am I, how do I compare to the rest of the world? And we begin to lose this sense of ourselves as the core of where we operate from. And then meditation, of course, for the mind, it's really introducing early to kids that you are not your mind. you have a mind, you have a body, but you are this thing that sort of, because we know that because I'm this other thing that can tell my mind to do something. So I'm not my mind. And being able to learn how our mind works and seeing the patterns that it has. And when someone, if someone says something to us and we get mad, and then our mind does something with that, we have control over some of those things and being able to sort of get in control of that. So you wouldn't teach that to a 5-year-old, but you would sort of show them how their mind, you could point out to them and get them curious about how their mind works as a concept. Like, hey, this is fun. Let's get curious about our crazy little mind that runs all over the place sometimes, When
I was a director at a local school, and a second grader who had some anxiety issues was in therapy and with someone who was teaching him some of the breathing techniques to calm himself down. So he asked to come in and see me one day, and he came in and he's going, he said, my breathing isn't working. And everybody in the office cracked up because it was just, they didn't understand what it was he was supposed to be doing. He was breathing, but it wasn't working. I don't know. I just thought it was funny listening to what you were saying.
I have a client that actually, we always do, as part of our session, we do a 20-minute meditation, and we do a rotation of 3 now. And depending on how he's feeling that day, he picks which one we do. So there's either sort of a seated meditation where we just sit and breathe and pay attention to the thoughts that kind of come across our minds. And then there is this physical one where we tense up each part of the body, and I kind of do that for him and I'll tell him each body part so that he can just focus on doing what he's doing. And then the third one is called the loving kindness meditation, where we literally just we give loving kindness to ourselves, and sort of like as a way of just appreciating sort of what we have. And then we sort of go out from there and we think of someone close to us and we send loving kindness to that person. And then we think of a friend. And then we think of a stranger that we know and see regularly. And then we think of the whole world. And so it's a way, again, of kind of connecting kids to the fact that they are part of something bigger, and that we have an impact in some way, but it starts with us. And I think that might be sort of if I had a thing on my tombstone or something, it would be like, it starts with us, but it's really meant to impact the whole world. And so we get to have both of those things, but being well and educating children well, to love themselves, to know themselves, to feel embodied and all these things, that isn't just sort of new age woo-woo. It literally is sort of our access to impacting the world that we all want to live in.
Oh, I love that. You talked briefly, you mentioned briefly that everything we do is made up, really. It's only true, like the word flow, because we kind of agree to the meaning of it. And can you talk a little bit about the blobfish?
Sure. So I have speaking of strange things, there's a book, so I am a children's author as well. And my first book was called Everything is Connected. No surprise. Right. And one of the things, there's a moment about a third of the way through the book where it's kind of talking about, it's introducing this concept of connection and all these things. And it says, you're even connected to blobfish. And blobfish, if you've ever seen them, are sort of just like the ugliest animal on the planet. They're so ugly, they're cute kind of thing. But the phrase is, you're even connected to blobfish. And then it says, blobfish, you say? Surely not that. They don't look like me, talk like me, or act like me, and they probably stink. But the book goes on to say, but you see, we're connected. We all play a part. In life, we're the same. We're all blobfish at heart. And so it's this idea that even though, of course, I probably don't have to explain the metaphor, but I will. It's, even the things that you don't think you're connected to or things you don't want to be connected to, we are. And that's okay. And that's actually ends up being beautiful, because if we're all in this together, what would you do next? Like that's an important framework to work from, that all of this matters.
I know all your books are on Amazon. Can you talk to us about your other books that you've authored or co-authored?
Sure. So Everything is Connected is my first one. The next one that just came out is called Our Animal Neighbors, and it was with Matthew Ricard, who the book is based off of Matthew's book, A Plea for the Animals. And he is the Dalai Lama's French interpreter. He's this amazing Buddhist monk who lives in Kathmandu, and I was honored to be able to co-write this book with him. And it talks about kids and our relationship to animals. So that animals are kind of born on the planet the same way we are. And so in essence, they're our neighbors. And it's this idea of, even though we don't always like our neighbors, but we always respect them. We always there's a certain level of decorum we need to show to our neighbors, even if we don't get along. And animals are the same way. We love many animals we love, but there's a certain respect that all beings on this planet are owed, just simply by right of being born here. And so the book kind of talks about that in a really sweet way that it approaches it nicely for kids. And then a third book that's coming out next year through Bala Kids is called Just a Thought. And it is this concept of how the mind works. And so there's this little kid that sort of is sitting there, and these thoughts start bombarding his head, and he's like, where did that come from? What is going on in my head? And it sort of introduces kids to the concept of, these are things that you can watch and pay attention to, and you can kind of see how your mind works in different situations. And really, you are sort of this big space. There's this moment in the book where it kind of has, you are the sky, and your thoughts are the clouds, and you are the ocean, and thoughts are just the waves on top. And it sort of has them feel this expansiveness and associate with sort of the larger thing, so that the mind doesn't have to be such a thing that takes us out right away, and that we have to follow every thought that comes into our head. So it's a beginning. I sort of like take on these tough concepts that I think even as an adult I grapple with. But I begin to introduce them for children, so hopefully they will start having these conversations earlier around sort of our relationship to mind, our relationship to the world around us, and have that be something that they don't sort of have to encounter later because the world's all screwed up, or that they don't know where to go. But it's something they get to interact with because it's a really beautiful thing to understand from the beginning. So
people can go to LinkedIn and find you and find out more about the books. They can go to Amazon and put your name in, Jason Gruhl, and that will give them a list of the books that you've written. I've looked them over, and I actually ordered the Everything is Connected book. So I'm going to try and use that with a student that is feeling very isolated, is not being accepted in his circle of friends. So I'm going to see if maybe I can give him some words to use with some of his
it's a great book for sort of that feeling of loneliness. There's an author's note in the back that sort of says, hey, just as a reminder, you're never alone. And this is one of those reminders that because you're connected to everything. So it's good.
So before we end, I'd like to end on some final points where you might give the mentors who are listening, parents, teachers, other people who work with kids who have challenges in many different areas. And I include gifted kids in that, because as I'm doing my research, I'm finding that there are many gifted kids who struggle emotionally and socially, and we sometimes don't address those. So would you be willing to think about how you might want to check off a few points that you can share, some great wisdom of yours?
Gosh, let me think. Let me dive into my pit of wisdom and see if
well, you talked about taking things that often we take things off the table, because other people say it's not possible. You just to kind of tweak your memory a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe you can talk about that. And sometimes you did talk about this a little bit, but the table issue is both for parents and teachers, but maybe you could address teachers specifically in some bullet points about how they've been boxed in, I think, and how they can expand their repertoire to be more inclusive. Yeah.
So I think I would say, one of the things at the Joshua School that was so surprising to me was when parents came to and brought their kids to the school, they had been so kind of beaten down around their expectations, and what at that point too they had been told by so many people, this is not, your kid has a slim chance of having a great life. And I think there's only so many times that you can hear that and not sort of start to take on some of it, even if you're an amazing parent. So the thing that I would say is just, I try and every morning wake up and put everything back on the table, and being able to sort of say, let's not change our expectation. Let's change the ways that we're thinking about how we approach these different things to get there. Life will tell us or dictate exactly what is going to happen. But for us not to try it because someone else told us that it couldn't happen, that is absolute insanity to me. So keep your expectations absolutely where you want them and high. And chances are you're actually going to hit some of them or hit most of them possibly. So that's one thing. And then with teachers, I think one of the biggest things that burns out an educator is just not being able to use their own excitement for life and excitement for teaching and their own sort of and sort of love for people. I think people go into teaching because they want to help other humans have great lives, and they want to sort of be able to teach those young people things that they wouldn't necessarily get if someone wasn't doing that for them. And I think the same thing has to be said for them, like putting everything back on the table. To me, and again, this was because I, fell into teaching instead of choosing it. But like, I would really look at what's required of my school district. I would, not necessarily, don't go against it. But at the same time, there is so much flexibility and so much wiggle room that allows you to kind of give a holistic and beautiful curriculum. And I know a lot of teachers already do that, but just continuing to not feel oppressed until the system changes by that concept, like be your own light that continues to say, this is possible. This is what I'm going to do. Like, stay excited.
I think that's the key right there. Stay excited. Don't let them diminish your excitement.
Yeah.
Because sometimes teachers get burned out by what they're supposed to do and
that's right.
lose sight of what they want to do. So,
yeah.
Jason, thank you so much for giving us so much of your time, for sharing
it's my pleasure.
Great insight, and for being a pleasure to spend so much time with you. You have a great sense of humor. I wish you the very best, and I hope that we get to talk again. I may just hold you to that.
I would love that.
In front of everybody.
Thank you. And thank you so much for what you do and for sharing all of these. It's an amazing resource, and you are a delight to talk to as well. This has been a fun time for me. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, mentors, for being with us. I hope you will stay connected, keep sharing your comments and suggestions with me, and I hope you all stay well. Thank you. Thank you, mentors, for being with us today. If you found this podcast of value, please visit justeducationfirst.com to subscribe to our blog and Mentorship and Education podcast so that you may continue the exploration with us. Our goal is to provide a free treasury of information for our listeners. so they can become acquainted with the amazing resources that we have available to us. We want to thank all of our guests for giving their time and sharing their wealth of information with us. Please also visit their websites and explore more of their resources to further your pursuit of the topic. Hope to hear from you at justeducationfirst.com. Have a good week, and thank you.